Hello everybody, this is Mike with TCAT's Deep Vinyl Tracks, and I got my crazy Susie Q wants to be in the room, so I might have to get up to let her out. Um, but anyway, I wanted to do a video about one of my favorite bands, and that is My Morning Jacket. What I want to do is go through and give kind of a small history about them and show some of the records I have. I'm only missing two of their studio albums, and I'm not going to get into a lot of detail about their other albums other than to mention them, their EPs, their live albums, so on and so forth. Um, but My Morning Jacket is a band that started back in 1998 in Louisville, Kentucky. That's where they're from. That's where they consider their home base. The band is originally was made up of Jim James, who is the central person in the band. He's the singer songwriter of the band and also plays guitar. Um, he also plays some electronics and so on. Um, Tom Blankenship is also one of the members of the band. He's on bass and he's been with the band since the beginning. Um, Johnny Quaid originally was a second guitarist for the band, and he was Jim James' cousin. And Jake Lynn was on the drums originally. At first, they were signed with a label called Darla Records, a small label. Um, Jim James, like I mentioned, was the founder of the band. He started out in a group called A Month of Sundays, and he had a collection, a lot of acoustic music that that particular band couldn't use. So he put together My Morning Jacket as an outlet to that acoustic music that he wrote back then. The other members of the band all came from an emo punk band called White Death Club, and he got them all together to help him out with this new project. The name of the band, a lot of people think is a little odd. My Morning Jacket actually came from the initials MMJ that Jim James saw emblazoned on the back of a discarded coat, and that's where he got the idea for the name. So anyway, right away they get signed with Darla Records, and in May of 1999 they put together their first album, The Tennessee Fire. Now this album is rather sounds like a debut album for a band, um, even though it may be a little more sparse than a lot of their records and such. It's the cool logo for the label. It still managed to get quite a huge following in a few countries, mainly the Netherlands and also in Belgium. It didn't do quite so well in the States, and in other countries, but it did at least start getting some attention. There's the gatefold. So that was the first album. There's some really good songs on it. I definitely wouldn't begin with this album, but it's one that you shouldn't pass up if you do happen to end up liking the band and want to get more into it. You'll definitely want to eventually get this album. So the Tennessee Fire, it's the sound for My Morning Jacket in the beginning was very heavy on the reverb. That was their signature sound back then. Most of it was recorded in an improvised studio that was up over the top of Johnny Quaid's garage. They basically threw the studio together, and that's where they did their recording. There was also was a 2019 deluxe version of the album that you can get now, and it contains a lot of other tracks like demos and things like that. Excuse me for a minute, I'm gonna let my cat out now. Okay, I knew that was going to happen, but that's okay. I love my kittens. So, after a Tennessee Fire, released in May of 1999, My Morning Jacket went on in May of 2000 and released an EP called Heartbreaking Man. Now, I don't have a copy of that, and if I don't have copies of the albums, I, of course, won't be showing them here. This particular EP, Heartbreaking Man, has 6 tracks, which contain new versions of songs and also some unreleased tracks. Then of June, the next month of the same year, they released a 7-inch called My Morning Jacket Does Bad Jazz, which contains 3 songs. Among those 3 songs is a cover of Jefferson Airplane's White Rabbit. In October of the same year, they released another EP called My Morning Jacket Does Christmas or Xmas Fiasco Style. This was released on CD and was made available on vinyl in 2015. It contains 6 tracks. There are 3 originals. There's a Nick Cave cover called New Morning, and they do a cover of Santa Claus is Back in Town on that. At this point, a 5th member of the band joins as the keyboardist, and that is Danny Cash. In 2001, in January of 2001, another 7-inch single was released, not single, 7-inch vinyl, called My Morning Jacket Does Gold Hole. And this one has 3 tracks on it and includes a cover of Elton John's Rocket Man. Finally, in April of 2001, they released their 2nd album called At Dawn. Again, this is one of the 2 studio albums that I do not have. This particular album kind of reflects the same sound that was on the Tennessee Fire. Again, it was recorded in Johnny Quaid's makeshift studio. And Jim James did all of his vocals, recorded all of his vocals in a grain silo to give it even more of a natural reverb sound. This particular album actually caught the attention of Dave Grohl, and so My Morning Jacket, because of that, was able to tour with Foo Fighters and ended up starting to build a huge U.S. fan base. So that's where they began to get popular in the United States, because they were opening for Foo Fighters. Soon after this, Jay Glenn, who, like I mentioned, was the drummer, left the band, and he was briefly replaced by Chris Guetig. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. It's Guetig. And he was only a temporary drummer. He wasn't with them for very long, and he was soon replaced by Jim James' longtime childhood friend, Patrick Hallahan. And Patrick Hallahan is currently the drummer of My Morning Jacket. 2002, My Morning Jacket finally signed with ATO Records, which was more of a major label. And in March of that year, they released a split single EP together with the group Songs Ohia. And 4 of the tracks on that split EP are done by My Morning Jacket. In April of that year, they released an EP, and I actually have a copy of it finally. Chocolate and Ice is the name of this one. And it has 6 tracks on it, all original tracks. One of those tracks is actually 30 minutes long. The others are more regular timing, I guess. So it ends up being as long as a regular album, pretty much. But it has the feeling of an EP, so I can understand why they would call it an EP. There's the spine where you see the title Chocolate and Ice. This was also released on vinyl several years later. Jim James is the only performer on this EP, except for on track 4, which is actually a voice message from Johnny Quaid. In November of 2002, they released another EP called Sweat Bees, and this one contained 5 tracks that came from various previous releases. Finally, in September of 2003, they released their 3rd album, It Still Moves. The bear on the front of this album was used as a prop for a lot of their concerts, and is still used quite a bit. The band considers the bear as being their spiritual animal. Again, like I say, this was released on Atco and was their first full-length album released on that label. Here's what the label looks like. This is actually a reissue, so I can't really attest as to whether that was the original label or not. That one also came with a CD copy, that particular issue. Plus I also have the regular CD copy of that one. This has been also reissued. The more recent reissue has additional tracks on it. So this is actually an amazing album, and it helped grow My Morning Jacket's fan base in the United States. Very critically acclaimed. A lot of critics consider this the highlight of their output. This along with their next album. And very good album. Great songs on it. One of my favorites. My Morning Jacket, It Still Moves. That was released, like I said, in September of 2003. In 2004, January of 2004, Danny Cash, who was the keyboardist, and Johnny Quaid, the guitarist, both leave the band. They were quickly replaced by Bo Koster on keys and Carl Brome as the second guitarist, and this is the lineup that My Morning Jacket currently has today. In May of 2004, they released another EP called Acoustic Sitsuoka. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. It's a short 5-track live album. Well, at least 5 tracks on the CD. The vinyl has 6 tracks. There's the listing of the tracks. A lot of these songs are all from the It Still Moves album. It's still quite a very tight live CD. It sounds really good. Even though you may have the It Still Moves album, this one is still a great supplement to that particular album. The thing about it is it has the old lineup before all the changes were made, and My Morning Jacket considers it to be a nod to their original lineup. So there it is. Also, in November of 2004, 2 full-length albums were released. These were both compilation albums. The compilations were called Early Recordings Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. These 2 collections bring together a lot of their rare tracks, a lot of tracks off their EPs that weren't recorded on albums, bring together some live performances from previous years, a lot of stuff that wasn't normally available on a regular album. Finally, in October 2005, they released their next album called Z or Z, depending on where you're from. Since they're from the United States, the actual name is Z. This is, along with It Still Moves, considered their one of their best two albums. And I don't have this one on vinyl, unfortunately. It's one that I would like to be able to get. I know there is a reissue on purple vinyl released right now, and I'd like to be able to get that eventually, but for now I do have the CD. But again, another excellent album. I would consider one of these two albums to be, or sorry, I picked up the wrong one. One of these two albums, It Still Moves or Z, to be the first beginner albums that you would want to pick up. Very good albums, very well done. The thing about this album is they start to lose the reverb sound that they had become famous for. They were starting to move to experimenting with other styles, and they did it so very well on this particular album. Highly recommend this. And from 2005, that's Z. In September of 2006, they released their DVD called Okinos, and I have a copy of that. There it is, Okinos. And that's what the DVD looks like. This has also been released on vinyl, and a new version of this was released in December of 2021 on vinyl, which has some additional tracks on it. And I'd like to be able to get my hands on that one, but as of yet, I haven't. Excellent show. This is a highly recommended live DVD. If you're looking for great live shows, this would be the one to look for My Morning Jacket. Just some great tracks, of course, all from their own repertoire. And so we come up to the year 2008, June of 2008. They released their album Evil Urges. Evil Urges was their major breakthrough album in the US. A lot of longtime fans were a little pissed off about this one because they went in a lot of different directions. They started to look more towards R&B music, and to me this was my first album that I owned by them, even though I was familiar with a lot of their older music. But I love this album, even though a lot of their fans hate it. I love it. I love their other albums. If you are not into that more raw sound, then you'd probably want to start with this album, as it's a lot more polished, and that's what made a lot of people upset, I believe. This one comes with some nice artwork, and inside you got the lyric sheets. The album has some interesting tracks on it. It starts out with Jim James getting his best Prince imitation. Let's see. Yeah, that's the title track, Evil Urges. Then it moves on to Touch Me, I'm Going to Scream Part 1, which has become a favorite among the fans, even though it was on this album. It's become a concert favorite. And then nobody really knew how to take the song Highly Suspicious, because that's the third track. And that track is got a very infectious groove to it, which people weren't used to hearing so much. And almost funky, crazy, who gives a shit kind of attitude on that particular song. I love it. I think it's great. It's one that I love to listen to. There's the gatefold. So, Evil Urges. of that album. I also have that on CD. This is how I originally bought it, was on CD. Liked it so much that I had to get the vinyl. Okay. Even though a lot of fans didn't like it, it ended up on 7 different best of album lists for that particular year, 2008. Did also get positive reviews too. In 2009, November, My Morning Jacket made their very famous appearance on the cartoon American Dad with an episode called My Morning Straitjacket. It's become one of that series' most favorite episodes. In May of 2011, a couple years later, they finally come out with the album Circuital. Circuital. That's spelled Circuital. This ended up being their highest selling album up to that point. And again, it moved back towards their original sound, but didn't move completely away from the new sound they were starting to explore. So they still had their adventurous attitude, which they would continue having through the years. A lot of great variety on this album. Song on here that was really amazing is a song called Hanging On to Black Metal, which has nothing to do with the black metal music that you may have heard of. It's a very cool song. And another album that I love very much. Sorry, here's the cover. And I already showed the inside of the gatefold. So you get 2 views of that. So in 2014, after a 2-year tour, the tour actually consisted of a tour that partway through where they toured along with Wilco and Bob Dylan in 2013. 2014, the band finally decides to take a break. Jim James made his first solo album, and this ended up being a string of different albums, like 4 or 5 solo albums that he released on his own. He also did a collaboration with Elvis Costello and Marcus Mumford called the New Basement Tapes Project. In 2015, May of 2015, they released their next album, The Waterfall. And now the sessions for this particular album ended up producing like 27, 28 songs or something like that. Too many for a single album. So they decided at this point that they would release a second album, Waterfall Part Two. But that was supposed to have been released almost immediately after this album, and it wasn't for some reason. This album is not my favorite. It's probably my least favorite out of their discography. Though it's not bad. I mean, a lot of bands would probably be happy to have an album like this. There's just something that doesn't quite click with me on it. Interestingly enough, it's just on the regular Capitol Rainbow label. Nothing fancy about it. Had a download card that came with it. But again, it's not a bad album. It's just one that I never really found spoke to me as much as some of their others. I mean, I can look at the album, the tracks on this, and it's a little harder for me to remember what they sound like. All their other albums had plenty of songs on there that just really resonated with me, and that wasn't the case with that particular album. And like I said, they were supposed to release Waterfall Part 2 right after this, but 2015 went by. The band announced they were going on an extended break, and there were actually some questions as to whether they would really reunite again. Um, but the extended break ended up lasting until 2020, and it wasn't until 2020 that Waterfall Part 2 finally came out. Now, Waterfall Part 2 does contain a lot of the tracks that were recorded for the first part, but they felt didn't really fit on that particular album quite as well. So they repurposed those tracks and put them on Waterfall Part 2. And I was very happy with this album. This one was a lot better than Waterfall Part 1 as far as I'm concerned. Some people may have a different idea on that, but that's how I feel about it. You know, this one has kind of a nice marbled look to it, dark reddish, brownish, and black. And I love the nice label in the middle that when it spins, it makes for a really cool pattern. So that's Waterfall Part 2. Again, very happy with this album. I'm glad that they were able to do whatever it was. I'm not sure. I can't really put my finger on it, but it just seems like their heart and soul is back on this particular album. The sound is also a lot better, and critics' reviews were a lot better on that album. And continuing on the next year, just to show that they're still around and still really putting out a lot of great music, October 2021 showed the release of their self-titled album, My Morning Jacket. I've shown this album a lot of times already. I love this album. I think it's quite amazing how they mix their new style with their old style, and just ended up making an amazing album out of this. So, My Morning Jacket, 2021. I don't want to say much more about it because I've already mentioned a lot about it already. It did very well. The sales were very good for this album, and again, they did a lot of their they have a lot of polished sound, but they also go back to their jam band days on this, featuring some songs that last well into 9 minutes. In December of 2021, is when they released their reissue of this album, Okinos, the live show. And I'd like to eventually be able to get my hands on that one too, somewhere along the way. Now, that's it as far as the My Morning Jacket studio catalog goes. I skipped a lot of their live albums. Jim James, like I said, did some solo albums. I do have a few of those on CD. This is an EP by him, Jim James, from My Morning Jacket. This is a 6-track EP, and they're all covers of George Harrison songs. There's the inner sleeve that it comes with. There's a picture of Jim. And it's all pretty much acoustic live performances. This was his first album. This one was called Regions of Light and Sound of God. On his solo albums, at least the two I have, he moves more towards an electronic sound, and a lot different from the My Morning Jacket sound by quite a long ways. So, very interesting. I have grown to really like this music. This is the back cover. Comes with some nice photographs and a lyric sheet. that's what the label looks like. And I also have his second live album. This looks like it could be a cover for Bjork or something like that. The name of this album is Eternally Even. And again, still has that very electronic, popish sound to it. Oh, that's actually a poster that they're showing you. Here's the back cover. So, and the poster is really psychedelic looking Jim James. Now, his albums, his solo albums, just like his My Morning Jacket albums, have a hint of psychedelia in them too. And definitely is the case in these. They're a little bit more experimental, but he does do vocals on all of these songs along with his kind of experimental art pop sound. He also was involved in some different projects. I already mentioned the new Basement tapes. He was also in a band called Monsters of Folk. This was released, I think, somewhere between Evil Urges and Circuital. Monsters of Folk is the name of this supergroup, and there's Jim James. You also have the lead singer from Bright Eyes, Connor Obersk, and M. Ward, who's done a lot of solo albums and is also part of the duo She and Him. And this guy is actually not a singer, but has actually had a lot to do with the making of the album, producing the album and such. There's the back cover. Highly recommend this album. I mean, this is just great stuff. Some of the tracks on here have been used for samples for different songs, and you may even recognize some of them. But just a great album. Has that folkish sound, but at the same time is highly orchestrated. Just amazing. It's hard to explain it, but I highly recommend it. Monsters of Folk. Look for this album. You won't be sorry. I guarantee you. All right. So that's everything I have physically, and as far as physical copies and that. And I didn't want to go into too much detail because I knew this would end up being long as it is anyway. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you look for some of their albums, and I can, if nothing else, just go on and stream some of their music. I mean, a lot of it's available out there on YouTube, sanctioned by the band. I give it a listen, see what you like. Every one of their albums has a different kind of feeling to it, but there's always that thread that ties it all together. And so highly recommend it. I think Jim James is one of the most amazing musicians, songwriters out there right now. He should be a lot more recognized than what he is. And again, highly recommend anything by them. But the two albums I would highly suggest if you want to get into their music, again, It Still Moves or Z. And even Evil Urges could be considered one of those albums. So thank you for watching, and we'll talk to you later.